19B, 19C and 19D. I call the Shadow Secretary of State, Sir James Cleverly.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. We're considering today the Lord's amendments in lieu to the Renters' Rights Bill, and I begin by recognising the work that has taken place in both houses to try to improve this legislation, and by thanking their lordships for the constructive way in which they have approached this endeavour. On the amendments themselves, on shared ownership leaseholders, this issue was rightly championed in the Lords by my noble friend Lord Young of Cookham, and I pay tribute to him for his persistence on this issue. He made a fair and compelling case for shared owners who, through no fault of their own, may be unable to sell their share and should not be penalised for reletting in those circumstances. And the government's acceptance of that principle, though through a modified amendment, is, I think, a sensible and pragmatic improvement, and therefore we will support it. On the decent home standards and the service family accommodation estate, the government placed a duty on the Secretary of State to report on the conditions of service family accommodation and provide independent oversight. Our armed forces and their families deserve and need decent, well-maintained homes, and greater transparency will, we believe, strengthen the confidence of those service families in the system. So we support this improvement and hope that the government will look at our policy to create an armed forces housing association that would oversee these changes and address the declining recruitment and retention rates that sadly we have seen under this government. Madam Deputy Speaker, while we support these improvements, the bill in its current form will in some areas be, I fear, counterproductive and drive landlords from the market, as well as putting up rents for tenants. Labour's own impact assessment for this bill supports this concern, and I quote, "Landlords can pass through some, but not all, of their cost increases to their tenants in the form of higher rent due to new costs. Under the bill, all tenancies will continue until either the tenant gives notice or the landlord obtains a court order for possession on specific grounds." Now, the government has committed to ending Section 21 evictions, but they must also ensure that court reform matches so that the system works for both tenants and responsible landlords. And we need clarity about when and how these changes will be implemented. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, uncertainty helps no one. Local councils must have the means to enforce the new rules effectively, and the government should set out a clear and workable plan to that end. The amendments before us represent a sensible set of adjustments that make this bill, I would say, slightly more workable. Though sufficient challenges remain in how it will operate in practice. We recognise the value of the scrutiny that has taken place in both houses and the constructive way that many of the concerns have been addressed. But the uncertainty in this sector is seeing landlords leave the market at alarming rate. I will give way.
He knows I've got a great deal of time for him as a person, but he must reflect that all of his speech is talking about the rights of the landlord and absolutely nothing on the rights of the tenants. In my own constituency, there are 600 children in temporary accommodation, in large part driven out of their private rented accommodation because of no-fault evictions. Does he have anything to say about the rights of tenants?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can only assume that he's been asleep through the last couple of paragraphs that I read out where I specifically spoke about the rights of tenants in the military estate, for example. So I reject his characterisation of our position. But the simple fact is, tenants' rights are all well and good, but if accommodation for those tenants does not exist, they are no better off. And what we have seen, an estimated 18% of new homes for sale, which were previously in the private rental market estates. And in London, that figure is 29%. And a reduction in the private rented sector market harms, not helps, people seeking to rent in the private sector. And I know the benches opposite will say, oh, well, we're going to deliver 1.5 million new houses. No one, I doubt even their own front bench, actually believes they have any chance of delivering that figure at all. And certainly the OPR doesn't believe they have any credible chance of doing this. So the housing and rental situation is likely to get worse. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the opposition, for the reasons that I have set out in my speech, I can confirm that we will support Lord's amendments in lieu. But we urge the government to implement them professionally and swiftly and focus on delivering a fair and effective system for tenants and for the landlords that provide accommodation to those tenants, and also the wider housing market. And whilst I've said there are still, we fear, a number of flaws with this bill, and it does not do enough to protect renters or ensure a stable rental market, and has the risk of reducing supply and perversely pushing up rents, which is why, having committed to not oppose the amendments in lieu, we will be holding this government to account for the consequences of this bill.